Hi, this is Jim Gibson with Business Sense Podcast. Thank you for watching. Do appreciate it. Today we're going to talk about greed. And it's kind of interesting when you talk about greed that people have a lot of definitions, and there's an American definition of what greed is. And it's usually that you have something and I feel that you have more of it than I have, and therefore you must be greedy because you're not sharing it. You know, sharing is caring. And that's usually what you hear people say, things like that. And I'm telling you that greed's a little different than that. But, you know, we're taught that even from kindergarten. You know, you show up and as a kid and your mom has packed you all these cookies and stuff like that, or treats. And you show up and you got your little metal lunch pail. You remember those? You show up with that. And what's the first thing the teacher says? Well, you know, you got to share that with everyone else, you know, and it's sort of like greed. And of course, you know, my adult viewpoint now, looking back on that, if I could answer that you know, kindergarten teacher, I would say, hey, teacher, I asked my mom to give me extra cookies. I put them in a plastic bag, or she put them in a plastic bag, or I made sure they were in a plastic container or whatever, and it went in my lunchbox, and I carried this lunchbox here. Now, if the rest of these people around here didn't do that, then they're idiots. They could ask their mom or dad, or I'm not here to supply the whole world with my cookies. You know, take it for what it's worth. The idea is there that the idea in our culture is if you have something and I don't have it, and you have what I believe is excess, then you must be greedy, because that's my definition, you know, using the definition of our culture today. That's the culture's definition, let's say, of greed. You have something that I believe is in excess, so therefore that's obvious that you're greedy because you're not giving it to me and I need it. And you know something? I don't believe that's the definition of greed. In my opinion, greed is a form of theft. And being greedy is holding back something that you should be given to someone else because of commitments, because of contracts, because of things like that, because of responsibilities. You should be giving it to someone else. I remember... I had a salesman for years, and I always remember this conversation, and he probably doesn't remember the conversation. It was an innocent conversation. But we were just talking, you know, just chit-chatting in the hallway or something. And he said, you know, Jim, you make money while you sleep. And it was sort of like you don't deserve to make that money while you sleep. And of course, he was referring to a website where I sell parts on an e-commerce site. And I said, well, thank you. I don't think he was expecting me to say thank you, because that's normally not, I don't think that's how it was presented. And I thought, you know, I always want to plan to make money in my sleep. I looked at passive income. I researched it. I researched what website was the best form of e-commerce website. I had to buy that website. I had to buy those products. I had to store them in my warehouse. I had to take a risk that those products would sell and everything else. And the fact that I took the risk, and also at the very beginning, there's a big loss. You know, you buy all this software, things like that, and it's no guarantee that people are going to buy this stuff from you. So, you know, I understand what he was saying, and I think he had a different definition, but he thought I was greedy because I made money passively. And I'm going to have another video on passive income and what it's about and what you need to do and why you should have passive income. But that's a viewpoint in our culture that if you have more than me, it must be, and if you're not sharing it with me, it must be because you're greedy. It's kind of interesting. You know, I think the Bible, referring back to the Bible, that there's a lot of things in the Bible that helps you in business. There's a lot of business sense in the Bible, and especially in Proverbs. If you go through Proverbs, you learn a lot, but in other parts of the Bible also. And one of the parts in the Bible I look at is Matthew 20, and that's where Jesus has a proverb there. And I think if you're going to figure out the definition really a moral definition. Greed is a moral definition. Then you really need to go to a moral authority. And so when you go to a place like the Bible to get understanding of what true greed is, it's just really a good place to start. So I look at Matthew 20, and you could read it if you want. But the story is, it's a parable, and Jesus is talking, and he's given a parable, and he says, a business owner, in this case, the guy owns a vineyard, and he needs workers. So he goes out and he hires day workers first thing in the morning, and he says, I'm going to pay you 1 denarius. Well, denarius was a 1 day's worth of wages, which was, what people got paid, day laborers back then. Obviously through different times and things like that, you can adjust it to what today is. And so they agreed to work, and he sent them to the field, sent them to his foreman to put them to work. And then he went out a couple hours later, and he paid those individuals the same amount and sent them to the field. And finally, late in the afternoon, near dinner time, there was only an hour or two left of light that day. He went out and hired more and said he would pay them the same amount as he would pay the first group. And of course, when it was time to pay everyone, he asked his foreman to make payments to each person. He said, but I want you to make payments to the last first. So the people that only worked 2 hours got the same amount that the people who worked all day. And of course, they complained. They said, it's not fair. We worked in the hot sun, and we did all this extra work and everything else, and you're paying us the same as you're paying these other yahoos out here that only worked an hour or so. That's not fair. And, there it is again, the fairness thing. And of course, Jesus answers, and it said, don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? And or are you envious because I am generous? Envy, greed, things like that. So that's pretty much what he's saying. He's complimenting the owner in this case, the owner of the business, and he's saying, don't I have the right? The owner's saying this. Don't I have the right to use the money the way I want to? You agreed to a 1 day's, a denarius for 1 day, and they agreed to it, and I worked them for 2 hours and you for 8. Don't you think that's fair, that I can spend the money the way I want, and because I'm generous, you think you deserve more than what we agreed to? So that kind of puts the idea of greed upside down with our culture. And what I've come to the conclusion on, and from reading and from understanding and from studying and all, is that greed is a form of theft. And if you're, you want to hold back money that you owe someone or things like that, that's a form of greed. If you think you deserve more than what you're getting, and yet you agree to a certain amount, that's greed also. I just remember a lot of times, not a lot of times, but a couple of times I have contracts with people, and we would do all the work, we would install the systems, everything else. And these are in early years. I would have a contract said we would charge so much, for the job, things like that. And I would go to the person to get paid, and they would say to me, well, let's negotiate this. And it's like, no, there's no negotiation. The agreement was I would do the work, and you're supposed to pay that amount that we agreed to. Well, I think it's kind of high, the person would say. Well, it's too late. I did the work, and maybe I wouldn't have done the work if you didn't want to agree to the amounts. So that's a form of greed on that person's part. And, I guess I can go through a lot of different illustrations. I'm trying to think of some of them, some other illustrations. I remember some technicians would come to me, and and I'd give regular raises out every couple years just because the cost of living, things like that. And I would never pay anyone minimum wage in my business, but that was my decision. That was my decision. So minimum wage in California is higher than anywhere else. I would always pay everyone a higher rate than minimum wage. And even my interns from the local college that were there basically to, they did manual stuff, the stuff that no one else wanted to do, but they also, we would take time to teach them IT, even though they might be in a IT class. Always made sure that I paid them a decent wage. They were college students. They had to pay their tuition. They also needed time off to do their studies and pass the tests. So always paid everyone a fair wage. But I remember technicians would come to me and they would say, I think I deserve more money. And I would say, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. That sounds fantastic. I'm always interested in seeing people do better. And I would say, well, I'll tell you what, let's do this because you're close to getting certified in Cisco systems and this level. And so I need you to go and get the certification. And I would go as far as to say, look, I'll buy you the book to be certified and I'll pay for the test. And of course, most of them would say, nah, that's okay. But I think I deserve more money. Well, what's wrong with working for your raise? Because I need someone who is certified in this area of Cisco, and if you're not in IT world like I was for many years, or still am, and Cisco is pretty significant, and Microsoft also said the same thing about Microsoft. I don't want to keep on going on with illustrations because there's a lot of them, but I do want to talk about one other thing that might illustrate this, that greed is really a form of desire or theft. It's theft or a desire to want more than what you earned. So I want to talk about one other thing, and that's Proverbs 3:27-28. And it says, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to act. Do not say to your neighbor, come back tomorrow and I will give it to you, when you already have it with you to pay that person. It says, pay people. If you promise to pay them a certain amount as a business owner, pay them. And if you have it and can do it, do it. But I'll go a step further. Don't commit to paying someone something unless you already have the money in the bank, or you're going to take your personal funds to pay them if you don't have it in the bank. It is your responsibility to honor your contracts. And if you say you're going to pay somebody, don't play games with them. And these are great verses in Proverbs. Like I said, Proverbs has a lot of verses in there to deal with business. And you can learn a lot if you study the book of Proverbs. But the bottom line is here, pay what is due, when it's due. I'll even go a little bit further than this. And I paid people as soon as I knew the work was done. So if I had a subcontractor, I would pay that person ahead of time. I would, not ahead of time, but as soon as I could confirm that they delivered the product and that they did the work and they are complete, then I would pay them. And a lot of times I'd get the invoices that would say, due within 30 days. Well, that's nice that they give you 30 days to pay, but I'd encourage you that if the person has done the work, pay them. Don't have to wait another 30 days, because sometimes they do the work and it takes 3 or 4 days or a week to put all the paperwork together, and then they invoice you. And then I remember one time I had a bookkeeper that would say, well, the 30 days start when I open up the envelope that we get. Well, sometimes if I have people doing work for me on the East Coast and I'm in California, and they send all their stuff to me, things like that, we're talking 60 days out sometimes. And, I guess in business world, it's kind of okay, that philosophy and everything else, but it sucks. It's not the right thing to do. It's just not. And I remember talking to that bookkeeper, and I would say, why are you doing this way? This is not what I approved. I signed off on, the invoice, and I said, pay it. Why are you holding on to this? And she'd say, well, we're keeping this money in the bank. I'd say, really? You're keeping, 3 or 4,000, 5,000, 10,000, whatever it is in the bank, making what, 0.05 interest? And what I found out is, and I wasn't always accurate on this, because sometimes I made mistakes and didn't pay people on time. So I made mistakes, honest mistakes. But what I found out is if you pay people ahead of time, not ahead of time, if you pay people quickly, okay, especially your subcontractors, they're going to want to work for you because they know they get paid. So, like in my house, I have a plumber. I have a couple homes and our houses that I rent out and all. And so he goes out and he does work for me. Well, as soon as he tells me what the amount is, and I'm sure that the work was done. Of course, I worked with this guy for years, so I know the work is he's an honest person. So when he says it's done, or he'll make it right. So as soon as he's done with the job, if he's replacing a hot water heater, as soon as he sends me the his invoice for the hot water heater, or he tells me what it is, I write him a check, get the check out. And I'm sure this guy I appreciate it, when someone pays me on time. I remember once giving you all these personal illustrations, but when it was just me and I was doing all the cabling myself when I first started my business, there was a computer company up in Orange County, and I would do a lot of their cabling for their customers, and I would charge the computer guy, and of course he would turn around and charge the customer. He'd do a markup and charge the customer, and that was fair. That was fine. But he provided me with somewhat regular work, and I remember the bills started adding up and adding up and adding up, and it was getting considerable, and he was getting behind in invoicing. Getting behind in paying me. So I gave him a call one time and I said, hey, I need to pick up a check for this past due amount, or actually for the whole amount. That'd be great. And he'd say, oh, okay, great. Come by Monday and I'll pay you. It almost sounds like the proverb thing. Come back tomorrow and I will pay you. And it was kind of tight for me. It was a new business and I had my bills and that I had to pay. I already bought the parts. I already bought the equipment. And I had, I had to pay off. And anyway, make a long story short, I showed up on Monday, and he asked me, well, show up at my house, because I knocked on the business and the door was closed. And so, when I got a hold of him, he said, oh, I'm at my house. I'm sorry. Show up at my house. So I showed up at the house. I knocked on the door, and he came out in his pajamas like 10:30 in the morning on a business day. And he said, Jim, I'm just so sorry. He goes, I was in Vegas this weekend, and man, I lost a ton of money, and I can't pay you right now. I thought, you must be kidding. You can't pay me. I need this money to run my business too. Don't float me, man. And so to make a long story short, eventually he did pay. But then he called up, hey, I got this big job for you. When can you get out and do it? And I said, well, I think it's going to cost X amount of dollars. I'll need to pick up a check. And of course he said, what? And I said, well, I just can't allow you to float anymore. I have to pay for the parts. I have to pay for the equipment. I have to spend the time. I got the gas. I got health insurance. I got car insurance. I got things like that. I shouldn't have to explain all those things. Just pay on time. And, that's what it says in Proverbs. Don't send someone away when it's within your power to pay the person. And I've always found it a good principle in business is don't wait to 30 days. Pay everybody when you know the work is done. Now, I'm not talking about employees. They get paid every 2 weeks. Don't play games. Pay them. And don't employ people unless you know you already have the money in the bank to pay them. They're not investing in your company. You're not asking them to be an investor. You're asking them to work for you, and you expect them, and they expect to be paid. They have mortgages, they have car payments, they have whatever else. It's their money, and they've earned it. So, the agreement is every 2 weeks. It's a little different than dealing with subcontractors or contractors. But the idea is here that you pay your bills on time or before they're due. And I do that also personally. I try to. Sometimes I misplace a bill or something. Try not to. But the bottom line is pay people. Don't wait to the very last day. Just pay the person up front when they've done the work, when they've completed it, and you know it's done. So let's see if I covered everything here on greed, because that is a form of greed, not paying people. So if you have the money in the bank and you're not paying them, it's really you're stealing from them, because you may not be aware of this, but there is a time value of money. You know, they have their bills they have to pay, you know, mortgages, car payments, things like that they may have to pay. That's up to them. But if you said you're going to pay them by a certain date, then you pay them. And if you can pay them ahead of time, I tell you, that's a wise thing to do in business. Pay your contractors ahead of time. Again, this is Jim Gibson with Business Sense. Thank you for watching this podcast today. I do appreciate it. And I hope you tune in for additional information on business. And, you know, and some of this applies also to employees. You know, if you're an employee, this applies to you also. If you want to raise, make yourself more valuable as an employee. Pay your own personal bills, ahead of time. Don't wait to the last minute. Always make sure you have enough money in the bank when you commit to certain financial commitments. Again, I'm repeating myself. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next podcast.